To understand the present and the future, it'd be a good idea to start with what we know from the past. And so we're going to kind of look at the evolution of astronomy from the ancients. So they give us a good basis for where we're at now. So approximately 10,000 years ago, you have the Mesopotamia, uh, located in Mesopotamia, which is current day Iraq. It's the first to make long term written records of observations. So they start recording those observations. Their astronomers at that time were the timekeepers for their communities. Their agriculture, understandably so, largely depended on them. And they're responsible for the 12 zodiac constellations. So they were first to have the idea of a 360-degree circle, with each degree, again, equaling 60 minutes and 1 minute equaling 60 seconds. The degree symbol is still used today to denote a degree and symbolizes the sun, which takes about 360 days. They had a 12-month and then a 13-month, which they called a leap month, calendar. Babylonians were one of many of the cultures located there. They believed in astrology. This is oftentimes confused with astronomy. You're going to see here shortly that it's very different. It's a pseudoscience. It does believe that the positions of the celestial objects influence events on Earth. So, if you know your zodiac sign, for example, is Virgo, that is said to influence or be able to indicate certain things about you. So they understood how the sun affected seasons, and so also thought that the alignments affected natural events, things like floods and earthquakes and such. They would try to predict these events, and that would then affect political and military affairs. So they largely relied on these things. It wasn't until much later that people started trying to align with life events. So, again, horoscopes, what you guys are familiar with today for astrology. However, there's no scientific basis for this. Moving on to Egypt, they developed and used astronomy for practical purposes. Their astronomers were also typically priests, and a lot of their livelihood, depended on the Nile River, and so they would try to predict the annual flooding, which happened on the summer solstice. Because they knew that, they were seen as very powerful. They had many temples and monuments, like the Great Pyramids. Those were built in relation to the stars, zodiac, and constellations. And unfortunately, most of the records from the ancient Egyptians are lost. Ancient Greece, again, many of the records, being an ancient civilization, have been lost. However, they are some of the earliest references to astronomy in the works of Homer and Hesiod. The astronomical advice for navigation and agricultural activities, and their three noteworthy astronomers were Thales, Xanaximander, and Xanaximenes. So Xanaximander said that the sun, moon, and stars are hollow, fire-filled wheels with many holes from which their light emerges. And then Xanaximenes said that stars were fixed like nail heads to a solid. Crystalline vault surrounding the Earth led to the idea of a celestial sphere, so he wasn't too far off. Pythagoras, of course, is best known for the Pythagorean theorem, but he originated the idea that the universe consists of spherical bodies moving in perfect circular path. He called them epicycles. So he's the first to suggest that Earth is round and that it's moving. Eudoxus is about 200 years after Pythagoras. He travels to Athens to study under Plato, and he invented the model of the universe based on the rotation of spheres. Aristotle was also a student of Plato. He was okay with the whole planets and spheres and everything moving thing, and he used really interesting concept here to determine that the Earth was round. So during lunar and solar eclipses, he saw that the objects, the shadows that were being cast, were curved, indicating that it was indeed spherical. He thought that the world was composed of four elements: earth, air, fire, and wind, but he was off in the fact that he still thought Earth was at the center of the universe. Aristarchus, he applied geometry to astronomy. He developed the small angle equation to figure out the angular sizes, actual sizes, and distances of objects. And so he estimated the angular distance between the sun and moon at the time of the first quarter moon in order to determine the relative distances to the sun and moon. And he's the very first to propose that the sun is at the center of the universe. Eratosthenes then used geometry to calculate the size of Earth, its diameter, and he was very eerily close. Hipparchus calculated the distance to the moon. He also figured out precession. And the best way I can describe precession is if I would put a top on a table and spin it, as it begins to slow down, before it stops and falls over, it starts to wobble a little bit. Precession is basically the wobbling of Earth, if you will. Ptolemy is the one who invented latitude and longitude. We talked about that in mapping and locating objects. He's the first to orient maps with the north to the top and the east to the right. And then he is the first to develop a method for describing brightness, or what we call magnitude of stars. And so he has this very accurate, good catalog of more than 1,000 stars. He also is the geocentric guy, and geo meaning earth, and of course centric meaning centered. So he really completed this idea of geocentricity, where Earth is at the center. He believed for some thousands of years after that. He made and recorded we're moving on to the ancient Chinese civilization. They made and recorded observations of eclipses, some 900 solar and 600 lunar events over the span of 2,600 years. That's a nice catalog there. They saw meteor showers as guest stars, and comets. Comet Halley made many appearances dating back to 466 BC, so there's record of that. They were also the inventors of the first clock and a water clock, which divided a day into 100 equal parts. So now we're going to go into the ancient Mayan civilization, which was largely in Mexico and Guatemala. The planet Venus was extremely important in their society. They believed that celestial events were indicative of communication with their gods. So they also developed this very complex Mayan calendar. So many of the buildings and temples in Mayan cities have astronomical orientations. They were placed very strategically. They were purposefully aligned with bright stars like Sirius, or with the planet Venus, or with the position of the sun's transit. So eclipses, think about a time where these weren't understood, when people didn't know what these meant, and imagine how terrifying that might be. So perhaps maybe they, thought of it as it was punishment or angering their gods. So it was really important to be able to try to predict them and be prepared for them. Going to ancient Islamic civilizations, they made many important observation improvements. They invented the astrolabe, and did things more accurately. They were diligent about collecting and translating the works of the ancient astronomers into Arabic, thus, preserving those works. Many stars have Arabic names, including Betelgeuse, Altair, and Aldebaran. You'll see these mentioned later in some of the constellations. Just a couple of video clips here. You probably will have to follow the link. I did embed this in the video, but I don't think you'll be allowed to click on it. So you'll probably have to follow the link. So it's just a YouTube clip about the ancient astronomers. And then this is the link to the second part. So they're both about 8 minutes long. So please make sure you view these.